Reading once again from the letter of James, chapter 5, verse 12. Achindanam, Uncle Darking were and then the veterinary. Arai chankaindanari indam. Ntakananki angan irachuramal. Ntakaning wurnam aturikamalyangan. Arai changwarandankaindanari. Alakan arantara churnamar arai chandi. Arantara pakarai chanki angan, agnilanap, apmanduin aldaniente kurl. Rala kotamali in the ngari agnara.
Pamela's actually going to read from Hebrews chapter 6, verses 11 and 12.
I'm going to read this in Warbury. Chalango, Kongula Kagato, Pardane, Yuminere Yima, Marine Yanga, Gojan Nera, Kambarului, Jankobongo, Kapanera, Chungangini, Mulagande, Kangolo, Nerala, Wangame, Kadogo, Yungangulula, Kadogo, Kotabiang, Walki Jeremy, Tranganyan, Matawango, Wangamekana Nerala, Yungangulu, Watan ba Wangwanyena, Warara, Walki Jeremy Yellow, Kuchachuko, Matawango, Yanga, Kajingulu, Kajigangulu, Mata Jeremy, Kuchaku, Wallap Barikalu Jana, Yapa Yanga, Padro, Kuchakalola, Walla Niname, Kadogo, Mulaju, Yanga, Kuchakalula, Nyanungu Nyangu, Wangu, Nina, Nyanungulu, Kajana, Yini, Nielangu, Yanga, Kuchakajana, Jangopini, Kambarwe.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Pamela. So I don't know how many of you follow the news that closely. Sometimes you follow the news kind of closely and then you kind of get sick of it pretty quickly. I know that's my experience. I don't expect that too many of you will be really interested in this, but I can't avoid the fact that it's hitting the headlines over the last couple of days, which is, of course, the big Elon Musk Twitter deal. Now, some of you will be like, Twitter, what's that? I just go watch birds, and that's fine. Just let that be. But what you need to know is that Twitter is a big social media platform, and Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, controversial man, of course, has just acquired it. And he's bringing about some pretty significant changes, which I'm not going to go into, that's not the point. But this particular deal that just went down actually has a bit of a history because Elon Musk has kind of had a long history with Twitter, been quite vocal on this particular platform. And then it was not really all that long ago that he decided that he wanted to buy it. And so he put in this offer of just a vast sum of money. I can't even remember what it is. I'm going to say 45 bill, something like that. 45 billion US, okay. Huge sum of money, right, to write 120 characters. No, they've got rid of that. But nevertheless, big amount of money. So he kind of put it out there, he got all the promotion, people were mixed in response, but then he started to argue that maybe he might have was going to renege on the deal. Maybe he kind of put a bit too much money out there, and he started to make these kind of excuses. Oh, there's a whole lot of bots on there, these kind of fake kind of profiles that are speaking, and that may or may not be true. And regardless of that, I don't know the ins and outs. But what you got from people was this incredible kind of backlash, which is kind of rare, I reckon, in nowadays. It's like, I think that the world puts up with a whole lot of kind of tolerance for people going back on their word. But in this case, people didn't like it. They said, you put this out there, you said that you're going to buy this thing, and now you're reneging, and that is not okay. And of course, the law courts agreed with him. They ended up going to court, and there was all this controversy, and it was all ended up kind of being settled or essentially kind of pushed to the side, and he did end up acquiring it. But I thought it was really interesting that the way that he put forward this grand gesture, and then he tried to find a loophole. It's like, I know I put myself out there, I know I got all the glory, I know I got all this profile, all this kind of stuff, but there's a loophole, and I'm going to exploit that loophole. You said that there's this amount of bots, and I say there's this amount. And suddenly he tried to renege. And I just wonder, as we kind of work our way through this book of James, whether he might have been a little bit wiser to take on the advice from James, chapter 1, verse 19 from the beginning, which is, of course, be quick to listen and slow to speak. We could all learn from that from time to time. But there is something deep inside of us, and I think sometimes we feel it personally, but sometimes we feel it kind of at a broader social level, where we want people to be true to their word. It actually really drives us nuts when people aren't true to their word. It's a big deal. I think about the court, even courts today nowadays, this idea of swearing an oath on the Bible. I know it's not as common nowadays, but I did kind of look it up because I was kind of curious. I've never had to swear an oath in court. But if you've seen a movie where they kind of swear, it's often the swear is, I swear by the Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God. You're familiar with that kind of term. And it's always interesting because you kind of hope that when people go to court to testify, they're going to tell the truth anyway, right? But they kind of got to go over and above, and they kind of go, I'm going to swear on the Bible, I'm going to invoke the mighty name of God because, I want this to be true. I wonder how you would feel, my fellow brothers and sisters, if before I stood up here to deliver a sermon, I'm going, hey guys, I've got some really good truth to share with you, but I'm just going to swear on the Bible first, right, just to extra assure you, right, that this is going to be true. You'd feel a bit weird, right? Because you'd hope that just simply by me getting up here, and hopefully because you know me, that I just tell the truth anyway. I shouldn't have to kind of swear this additional oath. I better swear on the Bible and I better swear under God. It's like, no. That's just kind of actually a little bit icky. Well, actually the same thing was occurring at the time of writing of James in a weird kind of way. The idea around oaths and around promises, around keeping your word and following through on the truth was getting really icky. And James wanted to respond to this, which is why today's verse that we're focusing on is just that. It is a single verse. It is James chapter 6, verse 12. And the weird thing about this particular verse is it kind of feels like it comes out of nowhere. I mean, we've been working through James for like months now, right? And even last week, we kind of spoke a bit about James and this idea of perseverance under trial, and Chris spoke about that. And even next week, we're going to talk about something different. But right here in the middle comes this verse that just sticks out and that we must take to heart because there is something really profound going on here. And this is it. Above all, my brothers and sisters, which is a really funny statement. He's like, James has been loading up. He's been delivering all this incredible challenge all the way through James. And then he says randomly, above all, by the way, my brothers and sisters, do not swear, not by heaven or by earth or by anything else. All you need to say is a simple yes or no, otherwise you will be condemned. In the NLT it says, but most of all, my brothers and sisters, never take an oath by heaven or earth or anything else. Just say a simple yes or no so that you will not sin and be condemned. It's like he switches on this tap and points to this very specific issue and then he actually turns it off. But again, like we have learned all the way through James, James is referring to something that is already happening, that is affecting the spiritual lives of these people who are scattered across the churches, these followers of Jesus. Now, James has already talked about the danger of the tongue, yeah? He talked about the fact that it has in it the fires of hell. It has this incredible potential to hurt and destroy and to bring about anger. And now he's talking about the tongue in a different way. He's saying, be careful of your tongue. In fact, we need to start talking about honesty and the importance of honest statements. You'll see here in the text vows or oaths or swearing. They're all the same thing. I'm not talking about swearing in terms of swear words. This is all the same practice, right? Which is this idea of making these formal kind of promises on the basis of something else, which will be uncovered. The other thing I wanted to kind of note at the beginning here is this is not about the kind of oaths that we might see at a wedding, right? There are times when oaths are really profound and very much required. We do child dedications where people take oaths and vows, and that's not what James is talking to here. He's talking about something else that is going on. But to fully understand that, we actually need to dive back into the teachings of Jesus in Matthew. Because understanding the common first century Jewish practices helps us see why James highlights this as something that is indeed most of all, right? And that's where we're going to go next. So, in Matthew chapter 5, verse 33, Jesus is teaching in that classic passage called his Sermon on the Mount. He's going through a whole bunch of teachings that speak to people's actual practices, their existence, how they'll go about expressing their faith. And one of the things that Jesus often says is, you have heard it said this way, but I tell you this way. Yeah? And so where it's adultery, right, being equivalent to lust, or murder being the equivalent to speaking a bad word about a friend. Essentially, Jesus is saying, you've been living according to this particular set of teachings, and you think that by living according to this set of teachings that you're doing the right thing, but I say to you, check this out. Something far different. And this is the same here in verse 33. You have also heard that our ancestors were told, you must not break your vows, you must carry out the vows you make to the Lord. So Jesus is speaking to the people, is like, hey guys, you know all about vows, right? This isn't foreign, this isn't a new idea, you've heard it all the way back from your ancestors. You must not break your vows, you must carry out the vows you make to the Lord. If you make a vow to the Lord, you must carry it out. And Jesus is speaking here when he talks about vows, is he's talking about invoking things, holy things, as a token to seal a promise. It's like, I'm going to do this, and God is my witness, I shall do this, right? That is a vow unto God. But what had started to happen is that people had started adding these kind of qualifiers to their oaths and their vows. And in the way, the Old Testament system of creating oaths and sticking by them had become distorted. Back in Numbers chapter 30, verse 2, it says, if a man vows a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to bind himself by a pledge, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. So back in the Torah, in the law, it made it really, really clear. God's expectation, if you make a vow to the Lord, you will do it, right? And you must carry out the vows that were made to the Lord, because this is a contractually binding statement. And it was also seen as very dangerous. Because after all, if you made a vow and an oath to the Lord, it was understood that if you didn't follow it through, it would have severe consequences. God's justice would come about. In Exodus 20, verse 7, it says, God will not hold guiltless the one who swears falsely by his name. So there's a sense in which oaths were understood, all right? So this is really important kind of background context. Oaths were understood. If we swear an oath by the Lord, we must fulfill it because God will have his justice. But something happened. Something happened between the giving of the Torah and the kind of evolution of the people over time, and that was that the Jewish leaders and the teachers, to prevent people from breaking the law's rules, started to create a system by which they could determine whether a vow had to be kept. And they did this by invoking a vow over things that weren't God. Because if I didn't have to make a vow in the Lord's name, I could make a vow in the temple or in the temple's gold. Or I could make a vow over these other things like the guilt offering I could take a vow around these other things that were considered holy that they weren't the Lord. And if they weren't the Lord, that at least means that I'm off the punishment bandwagon if I don't fulfill it, right? And so this system was created. Now, extra-biblical literature, that is literature that isn't found in the Bible, actually indicates that many rabbis of the time did not consider it a sin to break a vow if it wasn't explicitly made in the name of the Lord. It wasn't a problem. You can make a vow, break it, as long as it wasn't in the name of the Lord. Of course, this led to a whole lot of debate. Suddenly, some vows were legitimate and other vows were not. Essentially, it was a whole bunch of loophole hunting. It's like, how can I get away with engaging with the kind of the gravity of a vow to draw that kind of trust in from people, but actually not have to deliver it? And as a result, there was this kind of series of rankings around the vows. Notice this. This is from an extra-biblical literature. This is from the Mishnah Sanhedrin. You might recognize that word Sanhedrin, which is like the Pharisees, the rabbis or the leaders of the day. They were made up of the Sanhedrin. Okay, that's who they were. It says here, this is like first century stuff, right? This is first century practice, where it had come to. For one who is obligated by the Torah law to take an oath to another, which is done while grasping a sacred object. Where'd that come from? Who knows? That got added in there somewhere. If the latter has said to him, instead of taking an oath, merely vow to me by the life of your head that what you claim is true, then one rabbi says, Rabbi Meir says, the one who made the offer can retract it and demand that the other litigant take an oath, as he is obligated by Torah law. But the other rabbis say he cannot retract his offer. Once he has agreed to accept a vow, which is of less severity than an oath, he cannot retract his agreement. Now, this might seem a little bit boring, but this is painting a picture of what was going on with oaths in the day. First of all, suddenly there's a difference between oaths and vows, right? They kind of outrank each other. And one rabbi is saying, hey, if you kind of extend this invitation, you can take it back. And the other people say, no, if you extend this invitation, you can't take it back. So again, this idea of the oath and the vow is being muddied. Not only that, in this same piece of literature, there starts to be questions around who has authority to make an oath anyway. Look at this one from the same passage. And these on the following list are the ones who are disqualified by the sages from bearing witness due to their unseemly behaviour, as they are considered wicked individuals guilty of monetary transgressions. One who plays with dice for money, and one who lends money with interest, and those who fly pigeons. Any pigeon flyers out here? No oaths for you. And merchants who trade in the produce of the sabbatical year. It continues, when are the people listed above disqualified from bearing witness? It is when they have no occupation but this one. But if they have an occupation other than this one, although they also make money by these inappropriate means, they are fit to bear witness. Isn't this like just bizarre? This is first century like legal practice. Can you see how like it was supposed to be like oaths meant something? But now, like, suddenly there's a difference between oaths and vows, and suddenly only some people can take oaths, and the pigeon flyers are like, okay, that's not for me. And suddenly some people are saying yes, and some people are saying no. It is a complete and utter mess. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5, as he continues oaths, this, but I say, do not make any vows. So he's speaking to this context of complexity. Do not make any vows. Do not say by heaven, because heaven is God's throne. And do not say by earth, because the earth is his footstool. And do not say by Jerusalem, for Jerusalem is the city of the great king. Do not even say by my head, for you can't turn one hair white or black. Notice that phrase there, not even by my head. Notice back here in Mishnah Sanhedrin 2, vow to me by the life of your head, yeah? Jesus is speaking directly into a very real experience of people's lives around oaths and promises and being true to their word. And so essentially, when Jesus was talking to the people and what James is erring to in Matthew chapter 6, he was speaking to a system where there was this ranking system of vows. You see, an oath toward Jerusalem would outrank and devalidate an oath by Jerusalem. An oath by the temple's gold would outrank an oath made by the temple. If one swore by the gift on the altar, that was more important than swearing by the altar of the sacrifice itself. Which means that it was very convenient for me, because I could say, I swear to you by Jerusalem that I will pick you up from the airport. Sigh. Sigh's feeling pretty good? Great. Then someone comes along and says, hey, can you help me dig this hole? It's only going to take 2 minutes. And I say to them, you know what, Luke, I swear to you, toward Jerusalem, that I will help you dig that hole. You're feeling good, right? You've got my trust. Now, poor Si, his has been devalidated. I owe him nothing now, according to the rule. But I just made an oath. No. My oath to Luke outranked it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Si. Can you see what that would do to society? Can you see how mistrust would run rampant? Can you see how this would be exploited by people? Essentially, you could cast promises on whatever you want, and it meant absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. Oaths no longer guaranteed anything. And so the dishonest were leveraging this to their advantage. And so Jesus speaks directly into this, and he says, just don't make any vows. Don't go participating in this system. I mean, you've already ditched God, right? Because they're still worried about doing an oath to the Lord, right? Because that's consequence. But to heaven, to earth, to my hair, no consequence there. And so Jesus flips this and says, hey, you know how you've been trying to find that loophole? You know how you've been trying to rig the system? Well, I just want to remind you that by heaven's God's throne. So God's in charge of that. By earth, oh yeah, that's his footstool. That's by God. God's over that. Even by your hair, like you control your hair, we try, product. It's like, no. You can't turn one hair on your head white or black. It's all under God. So therefore, these superficial oaths that you are making that you think that you can get away with, I want to remind you people that they are all under God. They are still under his purview. So don't make oaths at all. So rather than using an oath as a cheap way to emphasize your word or convince someone to trust you, you shouldn't need that. And I think that this just reminds me, I think of the critical importance that it is as followers of Jesus around how we choose to use our words, the promises we choose to make, the oaths we choose to make. Now again, Jesus is talking about not buying into a system where oaths mean nothing. We ought to keep our promises, of course. This wasn't about keeping our promises, the system that the rabbis and the Jewish leaders had created. But actually, to be true to our word, to be able to say yes or no with clarity is something that as followers of Jesus, we should just do. We shouldn't need anything extra. Essentially, Jesus is saying every oath that you attempt to make is already under God, so just don't. Just don't make an oath. All oaths are always already invoking God as a witness. For he created and sustains all life, even our hair. And so this is why James talks about oaths. Most of all, my brothers and sisters, never take an oath by heaven or earth or anything else. Just say a simple yes or no so that you will not sin and be condemned. And this word condemned is an interesting one. It's like, why condemnation? It's because he's referring back to Jesus' teaching. He's saying, hey, if you try and swear an oath under heaven or earth or under your hair, it's like it's all under God. He sees it all. We're not immune from that. There's no loophole. There's always a risk that we'll fall under condemnation, under judgment, because we've tried to leverage a loophole that we never should. And so James says, use a simple yes or no. And Jesus says the same thing in verse 37. Just say a simple, yes, I will, or no, I won't, because anything beyond this is from the evil one. Anything beyond this is us trying to leverage some sort of influence and trust that we don't need to. Yes or no. This resonates with me because within our house, we have this phrase, is that your word? Is that your word? If one of our boys says at the end of dinner, I just want one more tomato. Great. Is that your word? Yes, that's my word. Because your word is important. Because sometimes if we don't ask, is that your word? You want another tomato, another tomato after that, another tomato after that. Is that your word? Yes, it is. We try to foster an environment where our word matters. our requests and what we say yes to and what we say no to, they actually stand up. You see, because if your word has authority, if what you say matters, then you don't need collateral. You don't need to invoke heaven, earth. You don't need to invoke your head. You don't need it. It already has authority. If your yes or your no has authority, then that should be enough. And a disciple of Jesus should be so reliable that no one asks for more than their word. This is what James is getting at. It's like there's this whole system where people cannot be trusted out there. You're going to be tempted to buy into that system because that system has loopholes that'll let you off in the world's eyes, not in God's eyes. So just keep it simple. Keep focused on fostering that word so that your voice and your statements have authority. Because when we talk about kingdom influence and kingdom impact, when we talk about your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, as we seek to participate within that, we need to understand that trust is the fuel of the kingdom, right? Trust. In terms of our actions, in terms of the way that we go about extending the kingdom toward others, that is the fuel, that is the heat, that is the link, that is the connection point between us and God, us trusting that God is there leading us and guiding us and opening up opportunities, but also between us and others. Because if my word has no authority, then why would anyone else trust me? And I wonder if this is why James says, most of all. Most of all. It's like if your word can't be counted on, then everything else falls apart. The good, the bad, everything. And so for us as followers of Jesus to fully embrace this particular verse, it means actually doing the hard work of making our word trustworthy. You might be sitting here and you might kind of be doing a little bit of self-reflection. I encourage you to do that. How trustworthy is my word? Do I deliver on my promises? Do people know that I'm reliable? For some people, you know that right now your word doesn't feel trustworthy. I want you to know that there is always hope. There is always hope of becoming more trustworthy. But we need to understand that for some people, this will be a long journey of rebuilding trust. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. And so that raises the question, if we're not going to buy into this oaths thing, if we're just going to do the yes or the no thing, then what does it look like to actually cultivate a trustworthy word? And I just want to offer a few things for us to consider here today in our time together. Things that I believe would have fueled that inclination toward making oaths and not keeping them. There's always a temptation to overpromise in order to impress others. To overpromise. I'll deliver on this. I'll go above and beyond. And those things, of course, aren't bad things if we have the capacity to do them and if we follow them through. But there's always a part of us that will say we will do it quicker, we will do it more, we will give more. And it increases the chance that we won't actually be able to say a simple yes or a no. And so part of avoiding this temptation to overpromise and impress others is to have a healthy awareness of our limitations. I know even as a pastor, sometimes people come to me and say, can you do this? And every part of me wants to say yes. But then I check myself and I go, what are my limitations? Can I actually deliver on this? And then I want my response to be either yes or no. And that's hard sometimes. I think that's hard for all of us sometimes to say no. I had a conversation this week with someone of great wisdom, and they were telling me a story of a time when they were younger and they brought this fantastic initiative to this person of authority. They got the sale, they thought it was amazing, and it was a beautiful and good initiative, and that person said no. And it just took the wind out of the sails. It's like, what? But this is so good, it is so godly, there is so much opportunity, and the person's like, it is good, but God has called me to do this. And because God's called me to say yes to this, I need to say no to this. Because that is going to make my word trustworthy. Yeah? So be honest and upfront around your limitations. And that takes some actual pausing and assessing and understanding what we have available to us. And that ties into the second piece of advice on making our word trustworthy. And that is, don't take on too much. What I mean by this is leave room for God. This is what I really want to encourage. Sometimes you will be going about your life and God will open up an opportunity for you to speak or do something that could ultimately be a beautiful way to shape someone's life. But in those moments, if our life is too full, we've just got no room to take hold of that moment. And again, I speak this out because I'm speaking and preaching to myself, right? Okay, this is not like, hey, you guys know this because I got this nailed. It's not what's going on. What does it look like to create enough margin in our lives so that we can be responsive to the opportunities that God presents us with? You know, our hands are full of all this maybe good stuff, but we've never actually stopped to give ourselves margin and say, but God, what if you want to do something special as I walk down the street today? I've got 15 minutes to get to my next appointment. It's going to take me 15 minutes to walk there. But suddenly I encounter somebody on the way that maybe God puts in my path. Do I have margin to say yes? One of the ways we can make our word trustworthy is to not take on too much, so we don't feel like we're at the end of our tether, so we can say yes with confidence and no with confidence too. Simply yes or no. And the third thing that I think is really important in making our word trustworthy is to not go hunting for loopholes. Don't get into the habit of excuse making. If something goes wrong, if you don't deliver, be honest and apologize. Be honest and apologize. Allow your response to grow your trustworthiness rather than add to your untrustworthiness. I think this is especially important between parents and kids, especially with that power dynamic, that extra awareness. It's very easy to kind of go like, well, I actually don't owe them anything. I don't owe them an excuse. I don't owe them an apology. Okay? Look at all that I've given. Surely I've got a few in the tank. It's just tempting. It is. And again, I speak for myself. But don't look for the loopholes. And especially, I just felt like God put that word in my heart as I was preparing this, particularly for parents. Show them your growth. Show them your struggle. Show them those times when you've said yes when you should have said no. Explain to them, teach them what it looks like to cultivate trustworthiness. You need to know why you're saying yes to things. You need to know why you're saying no to things. There is always the danger that we simply buy into a system of this world that wants people's trust and then dismisses the significance of that trust. That says yes to things and then doesn't deliver on the promises. And we need to be a different kind of people. At the end of the day, James' comment is indeed a warning. Just simply let your yes be yes and your no be no. Otherwise, you will fall under condemnation. God sees it. This isn't just about you and others, even though that's critically important. God sees your actions. He sees your choices. He sees the decisions that you are making. And so maybe it means for any one of us here turning up to work on time, being trustworthy. I said I'm going to do this job, so I'm actually going to show up on time. Working from home, actually doing the hours. Maybe it's paying debts that you owe. There's all sorts of ways that we try to create loopholes. And yet that's not what God desires for us. It's not what he wants for us. It's what Jesus warns us against. We just need to tell the truth. Yes, no, and this is why. It may be hard. It may cost us something in the moment. but ultimately it would lead us toward being a community that actually has fuel for the kingdom work that goes on around us. And also gives us the capacity to say yes to those opportunities that God presents us with. James 5:12. All you need to say is a simple yes or no. Don't make it any more complex than that. Let's pray. Jesus, we live in a world, God, that is full of deception. We have politicians that make promises and don't deliver. We make promises and don't deliver. We seek after ways that are part truths to make ourselves feel like we've delivered, even though we know we haven't been entirely true, and you want something far better for us. And so, God, may we say yes and no, not just knowing that you see everything, but also in the knowledge, God, that those things that we need to say yes to, you are in and through, you go ahead of us in. And those things that we say no to, God, you have given us other things to say yes to. God, may we just trust that in those decisions that we make, that you are actually there. May we not forget to put you to the side, to only feel like you are invoked if we use certain words. It's not what you're about. We can't put you in a box. We don't summon you sometimes. God, you are the all-powerful God who created us and knows us and who is truth. And so, God, we want to reflect your truth. And this week, I want to pray that each of us would have a sober assessment of what we choose to say yes and no to. God, that we wouldn't be satisfied with half-truths, but rather we would do the work of building trustworthiness. Sometimes we need to throw out the old ways in order to embrace the new. As you said, Jesus, you've heard it said this way. But I tell you, let your yes be yes and your no be no. May we be a community who can boldly and proudly say that that's the way that we live. In Jesus' name, amen. And we're going to close with one final song. And this song is called New Wine. It's a song that speaks to Jesus' teaching on the new and the old wineskins. Sometimes there are old ways that are comfortable, that we've become familiar with. But Jesus says, I've got a new way for you. This new wine requires new wineskins. What God is up to requires something fresh. And so this song really is a dedication to participate in that process. In the crushing, in the pressing, you are making new wine. Jesus, bring new wine out of me. I just wonder if today there is some new wine of trustworthiness that you are wanting to foster in your family, in your workplace, in your life. Would you stand and let's sing together?